My name is Sherry Guess, and this is the Heavily Meddled Podcast. On this podcast, I interview patients, medical professionals, and industry insiders, having important discussions regarding the all too commonly experienced but lesser identified symptoms of hypersensitivity to metals contained in implanted medical and dental hardware, diet, and environments. These metals often cause a variety of dysfunctional immune responses, chronic pain, and other syndromes that fly under the radar of most patients and physicians. During these interviews, the patients and I discuss ideas for managing symptoms, share personal lifestyle modifications, and talk about how to advocate with and educate providers pre- and post-surgery, along with options found for implant removal and the how-to of adverse event reporting. This podcast does not give medical advice. From time to time, I may interview medical professionals that render personal opinions you can use to follow up with your individual provider. Let's roll. Hey, metalheads, welcome to the jungle. I just wanted to come on and give you a quick disclaimer about the episode you're about to see. This episode with Cheryl was actually the very first episode that I recorded for the Heavily Meddled Podcast with a guest. You will notice that the video for this episode isn't quite up to par with what the Heavily Meddled Podcast releases as a general rule, but Cheryl's story is amazing and riveting, and it is absolutely worth hearing. So I just wanted you to give a little grace on the video aspect of this podcast episode and know that I try to put out quality material and quality videos. There was just a lot that I didn't know as I was starting out. So I ask your forgiveness and your patience with the process. Let's do it. Hello, metalheads, and welcome to the jungle. Thanks for coming back for this edition of the Heavily Meddled Podcast. We are lucky enough to have my special guest, Cheryl, joining us from Tennessee today. And she's got quite a story that you're going to really be interested in hearing regarding some of her reactions to surgical clips. So Cheryl, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't you go ahead and just start the party and tell us a little bit about who Cheryl is, who you were before surgery, your hobbies, interests, growing up, if you're married, single, kids. Tell us a little bit about your life, what you do. Let us get to know you a little bit.
I work in the tech profession. I do technical support for a large corporation. We have a house full of kids. So my husband had 3 children when we met. I had 2. We had one together for a grand total of 6. So we have the Brady Bunch in our household.
I was going to say, you got the Brady Bunch going on.
We really, really do. Prior to the surgery, you're going with the grind, right? You've got a lot of mouths to feed. So you're working, you're doing all the things like that. Go out, take the kids on hikes on the weekends, on our days off, and just do normal outdoorsy stuff. Obviously, that would change quite a bit, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. I enjoy sitting back, watching Netflix, just the simple things in life. Board games with the kids, and maybe singing to an app on the phone, because that way I'm not blowing anybody's eardrums out to blow off some stress.
Right.
Just the little things.
Yeah. Before you got into the medical issues, were you healthy? Were you happy? Did you do sports? What kind of physical activities did you do? Tell us a little bit about how that looked.
So not so much on the sports portion. Years ago, they diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. So as far as the physical activity, it limits a lot of things because I do too much. I pay for it. It is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. But it doesn't necessarily keep me fully down either. I'm stubborn as a bull.
Okay.
I do a lot of outdoorsy stuff. We go fishing, we'll do swimming, kayaking, we'll hikes through the national park, things like that. So, but the sports, not so much. I'm not very graceful. So anything that involves running or coordination, no, probably not my forte.
Got it. Yeah, I understand. Were you healthy besides the fibromyalgia? What was your health status before things got really gnarly?
I've always had a history of a lot of allergies to various things, nuts, mushrooms, things that come into contact with my skin. I use sensitive detergents. I have all of my life. Just things like that. Other than that, nothing major. No.
No big
Well,
history of surgery or anything like that.
I've had C-sections. My second kid was
Okay.
10 pounds 2 weeks early. He wasn't coming out any other way. I had a labral tear in my hip many years ago that they just kind of fixed, they reattached. And nothing major though. Uh,
Okay.
and I think I lost my appendix several years ago too, but nothing big.
Okay. So tell me where the fun started.
The fun started with a gallbladder. I'm stubborn as a bull and I have a very high pain threshold. So for about the better part of 3.5, 4 months, I just ate a bunch of Tums thinking, hey, something's wrong with my stomach. It must be an ulcer. I drink like a pot of coffee a day. I've torn my stomach up. Let's stop drinking coffee and eat some Tums.
Right.
Great. No, that wasn't happening. So essentially, I got very, very sick. I couldn't really eat. I couldn't really do anything. And I finally went to the doctors because I was so weak I couldn't hold my own head up. And they're like, no, you have to go straight to the emergency room. Like, this is not a normal illness. Like, you have to go get diagnostic tests and you have to do it today. You're very sick. And I'm like, okay. So we went to the emergency room and my gallbladder was 100% full of stones. And they said that the whole entire gallbladder was nothing but a mere shadow of all the stones that were inside of it. So my gallbladder had to come out 2 days later. Now, when I walked in for my pre-op visit with this surgeon, I would venture a guess that the whole entire visit did not even last 3 whole minutes. I literally walked in. He walked in and he goes, okay, so you have a very angry gallbladder with a lot of stones in it. This needs to come out. Any questions? Okay, thanks. And he just literally walks out the door, gets his nurse,
Great.
and says, she'll schedule you for surgery in the morning. You're going first thing in the morning. That was it. Now,
Okay.
I've had a history of problems with jewelry my entire life. As you can see, I've got this little rope chain, little rock necklace on because I can't do metal necklaces. I've never been able to. The only thing I can semi tolerate is pure sterling, but it can't be like subpar sterling. It has to be actual
Yeah.
sterling, not
925.
coated with anything. Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
What about
So
surgical
I've
steel?
I tried to have my nose pierced back in 2017 or 18. And they assured me that this was a very hypoallergenic metal and I should have no problems. It had to be extracted because inside, outside, the whole side of my face swelled up.
All
And
right.
so that was all she wrote there. It was gone.
Okay. All right.
So getting back to the surgical consult, nurse comes in, she schedules me. There's really no big questions asked other than have you been taking any blood thinners? Don't take any blood thinners. Have you had any trouble with anesthesia? Just the normal questions you'd expect for surgery. Okay,
Right.
not a problem. I don't think to relay in a million years, hey, I have a problem with jewelry, so don't put anything inside of me because they never said they were going to put anything inside of me. So I wouldn't have made that connection. So we roll into the surgery. Surgery appeared to have went fine at the moment. They pulled out just over 1,500 stones from my gallbladder. That's what went down
Like,
to
how do they count
pathology.
that?
I have no idea.
Okay.
So the pathology report said, well, it said the greater than sign, 1,500 stones. Yeah. So they got that, came home, went back to work 2 days after the surgery. Now, I know that sounds bold, but I work from home. I'm not doing strenuous activity. I'm sitting in a chair. I'm going to do more tending to my children than sitting at work.
Right.
So I went back to work. Gallbladder came out on April the 28th. May the 3rd, I was at work business as usual. And out of nowhere, I stopped being able to breathe. I had this pain that shot through the center of my chest, like right between my breasts, up my chest, through to my back, down my shoulders. And it was so gripping that I was literally sitting there trying to pull my skin up and off of me. Like I didn't know what to do. I couldn't breathe. And I thought, this is it. I'm having a heart attack. I'm dying. And I remember I was on a call that day and my supervisor, I had messaged her and said, I have to call 911. Something is wrong. And it's easy to type, when that's going on. Not so much if I had to speak. I said, but I have a caller on the line. And she said, ma'am, I don't care if you hang up on that caller. The caller is not important. You need to call 911. Problem was, I could not breathe. So I had to crawl on my hands and knees to the bottom of my stairs to try and get my daughter's attention. She was up the stairs and I'm standing there and I'm beating on the floor. And she's like, Mama, what's wrong? And I'm hysterical. I'm screaming. Like, I've never felt the pain like this in my whole entire life. I didn't know what to do. And
so you couldn't breathe and you have pain.
It was the worst searing pain I've ever felt in my entire life. It was like I was shredding from the inside out. I did not know what to do.
Where was it?
So it started right here in my chest, and then it went straight through to my back, like my spine. It eventually would come up here, like up through my chest, all in the back of my shoulders. And I didn't know how to process it. I didn't, and I'm sitting there gasping, like I can't anything. So my daughter calls 911.
How did you
scream? Yeah. So I'm literally just gasping and just like crying out the best I can. Like I can't catch my breath. I can't anything. My daughter calls 911. They're talking to her. And I vaguely remember just kind of saying, I can't. And I don't really remember a lot until the paramedics got here. And my daughter said that I stopped breathing, and the dispatcher walked her through how to perform CPR. Now she's 18. She wasn't a baby, fortunately, but she did what she needed to do.
Bless her heart.
So the paramedics come and they take me off to the local emergency room. Our local emergency room is a totally different story. Long and short, very poor care there. I got transferred off to a specialty hospital where I would spend over a week because apparently they did not clear all the stones when they did my surgery, and they got stuck in my common bile duct. So they went in and did what they called an ERCP. They cleared that out. Now, the funny thing, and I guess in hindsight, I notice all the subtle changes that happened along the way, but this is where everything really starts to begin. So I'm in the hospital and I'm itching just everywhere all the time. It's driving me bananas. I'm digging myself open. I can't stop itching. My liver enzymes went from 13 to 17 to the 1,000 range. So they were over 10 times what they should be.
Jeez.
I've never been a drinker. I've never done anything that would actually damage my liver. I don't even take Tylenol. So I've attributed it to the changes that my liver had during that episode and didn't think much of it. So I come home and the itching still continues. It's driving me crazy. I can't ever get it to stop. I'm like buying stock in hydrocortisone cream because I don't know what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, this sucks. So I'm dealing with that. And again, it's subtle enough I don't realize at this point what's going on. On May the 22nd, I woke up to my husband standing there. My bed had been stripped out from under me. My clothes from the waist down had been removed, and I didn't know what the heck was going on. Apparently, I had a grand mal seizure in my sleep. I had soiled the bed. I was foaming at the mouth.
Had you had any history of seizures prior? Ever? Never had a seizure?
Okay. No. Right. I bit 2 chunks out of my tongue, one on each side. And my whole right side was messed up for a while, a couple days afterwards, too. I don't know what side I was laying on or anything like that because I was asleep. I didn't even know what happened. So I went to the hospital again, and they're like, oh, well, let's talk screen on her. And I'm like, oh. So they do that. Obviously, everything's negative, and they're like, oh, we don't know what happened. Just go back home. I'm like, okay.
You just had a major seizure, major meltdown out of nowhere, and we don't know what it was. It was a fluke. Go home.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, and I'm glad you said that. I actually have a friend who just had a lumbar fusion surgery with no history of seizures, and all of a sudden she's having seizures out of nowhere. I don't know that she believes it could be a metal allergy. I've tried to plant that seed, but I'm glad you brought that up because I don't know a lot of cases yet where a seizure is a side effect.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to the conclusion that it was related until much further down the road.
Well,
Because
go back and keep
after
going.
everything else, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have that, come home, start recovering from that. That was the only major seizure that I had that I know of. They believe I had another one not too long ago, but I was the only one home. My dog was slung in the floor, and we'll never really know, you know. After the seizure, we come home, all's fine and well. Itching still continues. Then I start noticing my hair is coming out like crazy. And I'm not talking a couple of strands. I'm talking if I put my hand through my hair and went like this, I had a fistful of hair in my hand. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't think anything of it. I go on. The next thing I know, I'm starting wheezing a lot. Now, I am a smoker. I understand, very bad, but I am. So, of course, I'm just like, okay, maybe I need to slow that down a little bit. Just all these little subtle changes start creeping up one by one by one. But where it really starts getting interesting is after I'm noticing these changes, my stomach begins swelling. And I'm not talking like people talk about normal bloat and stuff after gallbladder. Okay, I'm not talking like, oh, I had too much salt, my stomach's a little poofy. I could not see my feet. My stomach was distended past my breasts, which are always in the way. And I could not see my feet. And that was a big deal because I have size 11 feet. If you look down and you can't see those things, there's a problem. So I'm like, okay, well, what is going on? So I tell my doctor, I'm like, my stomach is really, really swelling up and stuff. At that point, he's like, okay, well, let's just do a CAT scan, see what's going on, and make sure that, you're not having any complications from the surgery. Came back fairly normal. And that was in the end of May. A couple of days later, I start really struggling to breathe. I couldn't have a conversation like this. I would get one or two words out, and the more I tried to catch my breath, the more I started coughing. It was like this constant tickle and uncomfortable feeling in my chest. Like if you have almost even inhaled a powder, that weird feeling you get right here.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, and you can't stop it. It's just uncontrollable. That would be me between every 2 to 3 words that I spoke. And again, I call my doctor and I'm like, look, something is going on here. I can't breathe. So he's like, okay, you need to come in Monday morning and we need to look at you, see what's going on. And by the time I get there, my skin is cracked open. It's crusted up everywhere, like this real thick, yellow, scaly, crusty, I don't even know what. All over my hands, all over my face, like my eyes, my nose, my mouth. It was everywhere. I get to the doctor's office and he's like, okay, so something's going on. And I'm going to send you to an allergist because I'm not really sure what's going on, but it seems like you're having a lot of trouble with allergies right now. I'm like, okay. So I go to an allergist. Well, let me backtrack. So at that point, he puts me on steroids, prednisone, 50 milligrams a day, because everything is just so inflamed everywhere. And I really was struggling to breathe. Like I couldn't anything. And that's right at the end of May, beginning of June. I go to the allergist who says, we need to take you off the steroids for 30 days and do a patch test and see what you're allergic to. That did not go so well because the first day that I came off of the steroids, there was about a 2-week wait before I got to the allergist. So I'd been on steroids for 2 weeks. I was right back in my doctor's office. I had clawed my skin up. I opened everything up. It was infected. I could not breathe. That swelling, it was like it was shoving everything up into my chest. Like it made everything so tight, like there was a belt around my chest. It was terrible. And so my doctor was like, okay, no, you're not staying off the steroids another day. We're going to do something else. And so he told me back on steroids, don't stop them. And he sent me to a dermatologist. So I go over to this Knoxville dermatology clinic and I see this PA and he's super duper nice. I walk in and he looks at me and I had my Apple Watch on, which would blister my wrist. It did, but it keeps an eye on my heart rate. With all that other stuff going on, it was going crazy. So he looks at me, he's looking at my skin and he's like, okay, so that spot on your wrist, does that happen all the time when you wear your Apple Watch? I said, yes, sir. He says, you had a recent surgery. Yes, sir. He goes, okay. So when they removed your gallbladder, did they tell you anything about anything metal left inside of you? No. And he just immediately knew. He says, this is very, very rare, but I believe you're having a systemic allergic reaction to metal. He goes, because that on your wrist is a metal allergy, most likely nickel. Then most metal clips contain nickel. And so I sat there quiet for a minute because I didn't really know what to say. I hadn't really put two and two together that way.
And that's a smart PA, because how many PAs are really going to have that on their radar?
My doctor had no idea what was going on with me. And I love my primary doctor.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just happened to see that little spot on my wrist from my watch. And he just made that connection like instantly. He didn't even bat an eye. He didn't hesitate. And unfortunately for me, things started going further downhill at that point. Because even on the steroids, the reactions were still progressing. Like they just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And they just kept trying to almost push through the steroids. So really all the steroids were doing for me was it was making me able to breathe. So I was on steroids. I was on those Tessalon pearls, like those little cough drop pearls or whatever that they prescribe you. I was on 2 different inhalers, 3 different antihistamines, and I took Protonics at night and then famotidine in the morning. So they're trying all this stuff to block all these reactions. And my body's going, not today. And I'm like, oh. Well, so he brings in his doctor to meet me at our next visit, which is like 2 weeks later, because he has to have my diagnosis confirmed. He says, I'm just a PA. Well, to me, that man is a lot more than a PA. Okay, because that man really got me where I needed to be.
He's a hero.
Yep. He brings in his doctor who comes to the same conclusion as him. Now they've decided that these clips have to come out. It is detrimental to my health. Having these clips in is essentially going to kill me. Fantastic. I think all of my problems are done. So apparently most of these doctors don't know that these clips, once they go in, they can be removed. So every surgeon that you'll encounter, unless it's somebody who's either done research, they'll tell you that those clips don't come back out. They go in, they're permanent. So they reached out to tons of different surgical groups saying, hey, this is the patient. They requested the dermatology group to do several different tests. Okay. So the Melissa test was off the table, I was told, because I had to remain on high dose steroids, which invalidates the test result.
Okay.
And most of the blood tests that they could run were impacted by my steroid use. So I was in a pickle. I couldn't do a lot of the traditional testing because the steroids just made it impossible to do. They attempted to do a patch test. The patch test was inconclusive as well. So I was like, oh Lord, what are we going to do? I'm in a panic.
Does it surprise you that they're even trying to test at this point? Because they've already made the connection with the Apple Watch, and you know that you have the clips and they know that the clips are metal. Why are they trying to test?
It surprises me as well. Now, what I will say is this, that PA, he called me himself after work. I'm talking when he was at home with his family from his own personal cell phone. He would check on me. He would update me as to what they were doing and what road bumps they hit. He was calling me 3 to 4 times a week because he was very concerned. If that tells you anything, if a doctor is at home and says, okay, let me go ahead and drop my kids off at soccer and then we'll talk, there's a problem. But the insurance company was skeptical. The surgeons were skeptical, and no one believed that this was a thing and kept asking, hey, what proof do you have? We need more proof. We need more proof. And so at this point, he's like, okay, let's think outside of the box here. I want you to think back to way before all of this. Have you ever had a problem with jewelry that you've taken a picture of? And I said, yeah. Then when they tried to pierce my nose and I looked like, oh, if I have a giant picture of that because my whole face was swollen. He said, perfect. Send me that. And he says, anything else? I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking. And I'm like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. And so I started sending him all these pictures of all the different reactions that I had to jewelry, to different metals over the years. I had shirts that had little metal things that would sit across them as part of the designs. And then I would remove it and I would have a big welt under where all the metal ran on me. So I had a lot of pictures saved up that I had to really dig and find over the years. And I thank God for social media in that aspect. And it made finding it very easy.
Good.
So he said, okay, perfect. He goes, what I needed was an ace in the hole. He said, these doctors, they want to see traditional tests that they expect to see. However, they can't really disprove your claim when they are seeing, oh, here's a picture where she had a reaction back in 2017 to a piercing. Here's a picture where she had a reaction in 2009 to a piece of jewelry. He goes, those are my aces in the hole. It
And there's
shows that
no
there's
other
been a
diagnosis
consistent
on
problem.
the table.
Right. So he gets all of that information. He goes back to the surgeons. The surgeons still continue to refuse my case. I start calling surgeons on my own. I called surgeons in Sevierville. I called surgeons out in Jefferson City. I called out to Nashville, all the way in Middle Tennessee. And here I am in East Tennessee. No one would touch me. This is probably the hardest portion to talk about because this made things very, very hard for me. I had a very hard time hearing these words. But the final straw came for me when one group in Knoxville told me, and it's a very profound group. They're supposed to be the specialty hospital in East Tennessee. They had presented my case to their entire group of surgeons, and every single surgeon refused to take my case. If my reactions continued to progress, there was nothing they could do. She wished me well. She told me to make my final preparations and make sure that my insurance and my affairs were in order, because if they continued to progress, that was it. 39 years old, 6 children, a family. You don't want to be told that over something that seems so simple.
Did they know anything about your fibromyalgia diagnosis or any of your other history, or did they just know the acute setting of, I had surgery, I had gallbladders, here's what my dermatologist thinks, I'm having a reaction? Is that all they knew?
That's all they knew. Yep. So it wasn't okay, she has a ton of medical history, she has
Right.
this, she has that. This PA literally sat there and was like, okay, listen, I have this patient. She has a severe systemic reaction that's going on to metal. She is swollen. She can't breathe. She's tender. And the abdominal pain that I had this whole entire time was ridiculous. It hurt so bad. Like, it always felt like there's a mini Chucky convention going on in there. And I kept expecting to wake up one morning and see a little doll with a knife, like just standing over me, looking at me. Like, it was all these things, and they just kept building up, and they just kept progressing and progressing and progressing. And when they told me that, I cried for about 2 days straight. I couldn't function. And then it was like a switch flipped in me. And I said, forget this. And I decided I was going to fight. I started Googling. I started researching articles in the National Library of Medicine. I started looking and diving, just trying to find actual case studies of people like me, because I didn't know what to do. Then I was just desperate. When I was venting to a group of my friends, and one of them happened to be a physician, she had taken my whole entire case and posted it to a group in Facebook for doctors and surgeons who are just kind of going through everything during the pandemic and just trying to find ways to make sure that patients don't fall through the cracks. Of course, you get a lot of the same responses. Once those surgical clips go in, they don't come out. And then there was this doctor in Miami who was a professor who was overseeing all of the surgical residents at the University of Miami. And he had been studying for years. He'd been published numerous times. And he said, wait a minute. She needs someone in bariatric surgery with a hepatobiliary specialty. And we can do this. We can make this happen. We can make sure that we don't do any damage to the biliary tree, which is what I assume most doctors are afraid of. We can remove those clips and replace them with absorbable sutures. This can be done. Have her contact me. So I called his office. I did not have a lot of hope at this point. I didn't. Everyone else had told me no. He's looking through all of my photos. He's looking through everything else. And he says, listen, I wanted to do a consult with you first because I wanted to make sure that it truly appeared as though you were allergic to these metal clips before I intervene and pull anything out. He said, and I'm looking at your medical records. I'm looking at photographs. I'm looking at your doctor's reports. You have a very severe allergy and these need to come out. Let's get you scheduled as soon as possible. I sat there speechless. I didn't know what to say because I was grasping at straws and I was fighting because I wasn't ready to just lay down to something stupid. So we got the surgery scheduled. Getting to Miami was a hard ordeal. I had to do a lot of crowdfunding. That was a big hit to the pride. That was hard for me to do. But I was able to get there. I raised just over $6,000 to get out to Miami, which covered the airfare, the hotel, and my deductibles, and it covered everything, like literally almost down to the penny. And left
Was
me with
insurance
maybe
going to
about
cover the surgery?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So what finally convinced insurance to the point that they would cover it?
That I don't know. So here in Tennessee, I have my primary insurance. I have a secondary insurance. I don't know if it was the primary or the secondary that kept kicking it out and requesting more proof. But whatever the case may be, when my insurance was submitted in Miami, they did not mess around. There was no hiccup. There was no, oh, we can't approve this, nothing. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of it too has to do with that surgeon. He seemed to really know what he was doing. And he was like, okay, well, this is what we're going to code the procedure as for insurance purposes. This is what we're going to do. He seemed to really know how to get through all the kinks. And they didn't have a problem at all with approving it ahead of time. So we get everything scheduled. We get down to Miami and culture shock, big culture shock. Little country girl going down to a huge city. I get there for my pre-op testing. And on that day, I realized how really close I came to not being here anymore. I go in for what I think is routine pre-op testing. We get back to the hotel, we eat lunch, we get back to the hotel, and they call me back and tell me, you have to go straight to the emergency room. Tell them that your doctor specifically said that you are to be seen for elevated blood work. And I said, okay, what blood work was elevated? And she said, just tell them you are to be seen for elevated blood work and to call our office, please. And they weren't being specific. So I get to the emergency room. And the nurse had explained to me that the anesthesia group wanted to decline my surgery because of that one seizure. They were afraid I would have a seizure on the table. They wanted me to do a neuro consult beforehand, and I didn't have the time to do that before the
here
surgery.
You've gone all the way down there, and all the stars line up, and then you're afraid it's unraveling as you sit there. You've raised all this money.
Right.
That must have created a ton of angst.
I'm hysterical at that point. But then they called me back after that and said, hey, you got to get to the emergency room. I get to the emergency room and they bring me straight back, which was weird because there's all these people in the emergency room. I'm like, okay. I was septic. My white blood cells were over 30,000. My kidneys were failing. My liver was twice its normal size. My whole entire body was shutting down.
What was the cause of the sepsis?
The doctor said that the autoimmune system was just attacking everything inside of my body. When I was admitted on the 6th, and the admission note was sepsis. And at that point, he said I was so sick that I wouldn't have made it very long at all. So I get up to the floor. And they start giving me all these different medicines in my IV. They're hanging antibiotics and they're doing all these things and they're giving me something for my nerves because at this point I was a basket case. There's no nice way to put it. I was just nervous. I was on overdrive. I was so scared with everything going on. I didn't know what to do. They do all of that. They decided while I'm in the hospital, they're going to send neurology up to do a consult on me, make sure I'm not a high risk for seizures and all this other stuff. Fine. So they did the surgery on January the 9th. The doctor came down. He stood at my bedside beforehand and he's like, I've got you. Don't worry about it. He had previously laid out all of the risks. They sounded significant. They did, because there's clips on arteries, like cystic arteries and stuff. And so I'm like, well, let's do it, because they have to come out. And if I sit here and they don't come out, it's going to be so much worse, because I don't even stand a chance. He relayed those at my bedside again. And he's like, look, here's the deal. I'm not leaving anything inside of you because you've been through enough. He said, so I will cauterize what I need to cauterize. I will try to control any potential bleeding that way. If I need to, I will put in absorbable sutures. So, but I will try everything I can to control bleeding by all other means, and we'll get these out of you. Okay. I think I was in surgery about 4 hours, roughly. I went down very early in that morning, and by the time I got up to my room, it was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, granted, you have to wake up from anesthesia, all that, so it was probably about 4 hours. So when I got back up to the floor, the doctor came up and told me how the surgery went. He said he removed 6 clips, and I had one that was floating outside of my intestines, like it wasn't attached to anything.
A mistake?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't
know
have
if
a
it
clue.
was attached somewhere and dislodged or migrated.
No, and when I looked at the actual lab report for them, one said it was in toto. It said ENTOTO. They called it in toto, and they said that there were no cells present inside of the clip. So I don't know if that means that it had never been clamped on anything, or if it had just been floating in there for a while. I don't have a clue. He said that I was lucky that I didn't puncture anything in there, because it had been just free floating all around inside the intestines. But he was able to retrieve all the clips that were in there. He pulled them all out. And almost the second that I got up to that floor, like my stretcher touched that floor, I got up and started walking. Because post-op, they always tell you, you have to walk, you have to walk, you have to walk. It's good for you. I remember from the gallbladder, that gas pain, and that gas pain was probably worse than the surgical pain itself. And I didn't want that again. So I got up and I started walking.
So you're walking.
Like, I'm not doing that. Yeah.
Right.
So I did. And when I stood up from that stretcher, I started crying because I could see my feet.
That fast.
And even with the surgery, it was mind blowing, because even with the actual surgery itself, you expect to have swelling and stuff like that. I expected everything to be worse before it got better. What I did not anticipate was standing up and looking down and being able to see my slippers that I was putting on my feet. And it sounds like the dumbest thing in the world, but I started bawling.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Attention metalheads. Are you struggling with skin rashes, joint and systemic pain, or fatigue that just won't go away? Type 4 metal allergy is often overlooked as a culprit in many of today's chronic illnesses. Get to the root of the problem with MALISA testing. MALISA is a scientifically proven and clinically validated test that measures immune reactivity to metal allergens like nickel, cobalt, and titanium. With fast and reliable results, you can get the answers you need to find relief and live a healthier life. Don't let metal allergies control your life any longer. Visit malisa.org to learn more and schedule your test. Trust us, you'll be glad you did. MALISA, a valuable diagnostic tool in medicine.
Feet. The first day I was real groggy and stuff like that. And the next day is when I really started to realize, okay, I'm really not that short of breath anymore. I'm doing well. I'm talking in whole sentences. Like, okay, things are different. I did so well after the surgery. They did discharge me the day after my surgery. So that was nice. I wanted to get back home to Tennessee. But we had to hang around until the follow-up appointment just to make sure that it was safe for me to travel back. So
and it's not like you can go to Disney World.
Yeah, that meant laying in a hotel bed for days. There's only so much Netflix you can watch. I think by about 2 to 3 days out, I realized, oh my gosh, I am like breathing so much better. Like things were just improving like crazy. So I got in the shower for the first time after my surgery. And I was scared because I was like, oh gosh, that water hit my incisions. It's going to hurt. But it really didn't bother me that bad. But then I did something. I started singing at the top of my lungs in the shower. And I wasn't choking. And I wasn't gasping. And I was like, oh my God, I can sing again. It was a lot. And the improvements were so immediate, just night and day.
It's like they
Absolute
just
night
took
and
your
day.
despair and said, here's some hope. Here's your hope
Yeah.
back. We've
Yeah.
kept this for you.
Yeah. Babied my incisions. I absolutely milked my recovery because I knew I had a lot on the line. So I literally took everything to heart. When they said don't lift anything for 6 weeks, you know, ask my husband. I didn't lift a blessed thing. I wasn't touching nothing. I wouldn't even walk up them stairs because I was so afraid to mess something up that they fixed and have no one to fix it. It was a very long journey with a lot of stuff along the way. And for something that I never in a million years thought that I would experience or go through because of something I didn't even know was in there.
But they didn't leave any clips apparently when they took your appendix out or when you did your C-sections. No clips, no nothing.
No,
What a blessing that is.
no.
Because your
And
reactions are so severe that at this point, if you would have had anything else, you would know because you wouldn't be as well as you are. How long has it been since this all happened?
so the actual gallbladder came out on April the 28th of 2022. They took the clips out on January the 9th. Now they did do a scan from my chest all the way down to my groin, January 9th of this year.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
wow. So this is
Yep.
still really fresh.
Yep. But they did a
Wow.
scan with contrast from my shoulders down to my groin to look for any other clips that might be in my body. And nothing else showed up. And funny story, when they did that, they injected me with an IV dye called gadolinium. And they had to call a rapid response to the MRI machine
For
because I
the
went into
listeners who don't
anaphylaxis from it.
For the listeners who don't know, gadolinium is a metal contrast agent. I have the same issue. I have over 200 times the highest safe amount of gadolinium in my body because I don't eliminate it. We've never known why. And I didn't even know until a year ago that it was a metal agent. We were just trying to figure out why I had so much gadolinium in my body. So there's something with the metal allergy that the body can't break it down, the body can't absorb it. I don't know what the mechanism is, but yeah, anybody that has a metal allergy, the gadolinium is a huge red flag.
I didn't quite know that at the time, and I didn't know what they were injecting into me.
How did they
I found it
counteract it?
afterwards. I don't really know what they did. It was all kind of a blur in there because I was in the tube and I was telling the technician I squeezed a little ball that I had in my hand. And I said, everything's really, really itchy. And he's like, okay, well, let's try and continue and get as many pictures as we can. And I'm like, okay. And I squeezed it again. I was like, my throat. And he's like, oh God. And then the next thing you know, you hear rapid response to MRI. People start running in and they're dragging me out. One's putting Benadryl into my arm. And I really don't remember much else. I'm very sensitive to medication in general. So
Sure.
even Benadryl makes me really, really sleepy. I didn't really black out. I just don't really remember the rest of the evening.
Well, at this point, they're trying to save your life when your throat starts closing. It's serious.
I don't really know what exactly they did. I don't remember making it back to the room or anything like that. I called my husband and I was like, I had a really bad allergic reaction last night, I think. I don't think I was dreaming. Like I did go back and look at my reports to make sure I wasn't crazy. And it did say that I had a reaction to the dye and they had to stop the MRI. But yeah, they did the MRI to locate and make sure there were no other clips anywhere inside of my body. And they were all contained to the gallbladder. He said it looked like they might have sutured my appendix when they pulled it.
Tender mercies. What a blessing that they did.
Yeah. There was nothing else in there as far as clips that they could find. And then he used fluoroscopy while he was in there as well. Just make sure there was nothing else.
First of all, the surgeon who was willing to take everything out in Florida, what did he say when he came in for follow-up? And then did you go back to the PA in Tennessee and did you go back to any of those doctors or those clinics? I guess we're still early, right? We're only less than 30 days after the surgery. So who have you talked to? Who are you going to go back to? I guess you haven't filed an adverse event report yet. Tell me what all that looks like for you.
I have filed an adverse event report
Okay.
to medical devices through the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I did file that. I attached all my medical records to it. No shame, none. because they have to understand. Yes, it's easy for me to sit here and talk about it, but if they don't see how this physically transpired and how it went down, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know the back end of my story. I know what I went through. So I sent them every medical record I had. They sent me a confirmation saying that they were adding it to their database. Now, my PA, he will still email me and make sure I'm okay. Fantastic, fantastic physician. I don't care if he says I'm just a PA, like, you are so much more and you'll never understand it. That's
Saved your
my thought
life.
process with him. Yeah. My primary care physician, he has seen me just about every 2 weeks since I've been home because he wants to just keep track, make sure I'm healing okay, make sure everything's doing okay, make sure my liver's recovering because it got really, really big and it was not happy. So I actually have to have an ultrasound on that here because they want to make sure that it's not still enlarged. My liver enzymes are great, but they were also great when my liver was twice its normal size. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
We don't know if the
So
liver's returned to its normal size at this point or not.
yeah, and we're going to do that in the form of an ultrasound. He said he was concerned that I've had a lot of radiation with CT scans and everything else that they've done over the last 7 months while I was going through all of that. And so he preferred to go with an ultrasound, but wanted to make sure I wasn't still tender from the surgery before he did the ultrasound. So that's fine. Now, when I first got home, I did have a bout with some itching because of the liver thing. It wasn't like before, it was like a prickly itch. It wasn't like I was digging myself raw or anything like that. It would just come, and then just as quick as it would come, it would go, and then it was fine. And I was like, okay. But other than that, I've had no real complications. Everything went really, really smoothly after the surgery. Um, Everything there on that aspect, I can't complain about. And the original surgeon that pulled my gallbladder out, I have not gone back to that particular surgeon, but I did leave him an ungodly, awful manifesto. I sent the lengthiest email with so many medical documents and said, please, please communicate with your patient. If you had taken 2 minutes and said, hey, we're going to leave some clips behind you. Have you ever had a history of metal sensitivity? Just the same way they do if you go into an MRI. Do you have a metal in your body? You ask these questions preventatively. They did not follow up with me. And they just left me on red, so to speak. I got a phone call from the actual hospital where my surgery was performed at, asking me about my experience. So I sat there and I went through all of the things that I went through. And she's like, oh my gosh, you could have died. And I said, I almost did. And she literally sat there and said, we're looking at revising our surgical screening process. In the event that that would happen, would it be okay for them to contact you again for reference? And I said, yeah, absolutely, because it would absolutely benefit for you to take 2 seconds to add that into a pre-op questionnaire.
So hard that that doctor didn't respond at all. It's got to make you not feel important and terribly invalidated.
It's not so much that I don't feel invalidated because I know what I went through and I know that it's not on me. I almost feel like the surgeon himself is like, ooh, and is like a deer caught in headlights and just doesn't want to deal with it. That's fine. That's on him. Whatever. Me, on the other hand, I'm going to use my voice because I don't ever want anybody to go through what I had to go through, like ever. The surgeon that performed the removal that took all of my clips out, he said that he plans to add it into his curriculum that he's teaching these surgeons to screen for metal allergies beforehand, ask certain questions that might indicate that there's a metal allergy. And the surgeon himself said, I have performed over 30,000 surgeries to date. I cannot tell you how many surgical clips I've placed in patients because we are taught this is completely safe. This will not harm our patients. He said, and now I question that. He said that he will be educating his students and letting them know that is a possibility to ask questions. And then his practitioner had stated that they are planning to start asking people if they have a metal sensitivity prior to surgery. So baby steps.
Yeah, the medical narrative absolutely needs to be changed surrounding this. I just went in this week. I had a shoulder surgery and they left what's called a toggle lock to tie down one of my tendons. And actually, it was really interesting. My pain's been up here since the surgery. The actual toggle is actually in the back under here. I was talking to another physician who is very experienced with metal allergies, and he knew of a patient that had wires in his sternum, and the patient felt the pain in the back. I was confused because I've always had the pain here and not in the back. When he pressed on it, I had it in the back, but I went and talked to him, and he's one of the best shoulder surgeons in the DFW area. And I said, "How many of these have you had to remove?" He said, "None." And I was telling him some of the experiences. I said, "I know you need clinical trials, and we have mountains of anecdotal and empirical evidence, but we don't have the clinical trials." And he just looked at me in the eye. He said, "It's because it's rare." I said, "No, it's not rare. It's underdiagnosed. And people are just now starting to learn to connect the dots." He's a good surgeon. The goal of this podcast is not to throw doctors under the bus. They know what they're taught, and there's so much continuing education and so much curriculum. They know what they're told, but I just think they're not told. I'm not throwing him under the bus, and I'm not going to hold it against him, but I do wish, and I'm sure that you can relate, I do wish some of them were more humble and more teachable. Nobody says that just because you have those initials behind your name, that you're expected to know everything about medicine and about the body. That's why they call it the practice of medicine. It's a practice.
Yep.
One of my things is I think 50% of doctors graduated in the bottom half of their class. And that is like legit true. Some are amazing, like the rock star in Florida. And then you've got some that.
And some physicians will practice for decades, and there's still certain things that they'll never see. It is what it is. But when they open their eyes,
the hard thing for me to stomach, and we just had a guest on the podcast. I don't know if you've heard that episode yet, but this man was paralyzed 16 hours of every day, had the metal removed from his ankle. And if you're just tuning into the podcast, go back and listen to Dana's episode. He was paralyzed 16 hours a day, full rigid quadriplegic. Stumbles on the fact that it was a metal allergy by having some metal removed. Just a surgeon was like, "Hey, let's clean this up while we're in there." All of a sudden, he goes from being paralyzed 16 hours a day to 45 minutes, takes out the rest of his dental metal, and he's never had an episode again in 6 years. Goes back to the doctors, and the doctors said, "Well, we don't know what it was, but whatever you had going on, you're clearly in remission." They didn't even acknowledge it. After all of that, we're talking clinics like the Mayo and like the Cleveland Clinic. Come on, how much would you learn from patients if you just listened, if you just considered that you may be wrong? And how many people are going into their doctors suspecting a metal allergy and having the doctor say, "Nope, that's not it." My story, I don't know if you heard my story, but before I was diagnosed, I went into a doctor who was fellowship trained in allergy, immunology, and rheumatology. She was board certified in internal medicine, and she looked me in the eye and said, "I don't know what your problem is, but you don't have any symptoms of metal allergy. I'll sign the requisition for your test, but I don't believe in the test, and I don't believe that that's what's going on. You're just going to have to learn to live with it." And she said that. And like you, I mean, like you, when you were told to go home and get your affairs in order, that's a life sentence. And had I not been as tenacious as I am, I would have taken that. She's a doctor. She has all these degrees and all these certifications. And what do I know? But if I'd listened to her, I would have ate a bullet. I mean, I'd be dead.
And that's where I was. I literally, right before I left for Miami, I sat here and I recorded videos, one for my husband, one for each of my kids, because I didn't know if I was going to make it back. I was scared to death that I wouldn't. And just really sitting there, and you'd have to understand, if I walked 5 feet to the toilet, I could not breathe at all. I sat here and I worked through it all. I didn't miss a day of work. I would hit the mute button on my phone every 2 to 3 words to get through what I needed to get through with my calls to get to the end of the day. But nothing hits you in the gut like sitting here and making videos for your family members and telling them, "Hey, it's okay, move on. I love you. I'm watching over you." Because you really don't know. So yeah, they do need to listen to patients. They really, really do. And they need to think outside the box, because it's not black and white. Our bodies are so weird that it's ridiculous. So yeah, I agree. They need to think outside the box. Sorry, I got a little emotional there.
Oh, please be emotional. You've earned that right. It's incredibly heart-wrenching what you had to go through. And I'm really glad that you're here to tell your story. I know for me, and I don't know if you know this, but I will share this with you. I have a lot of other surgical metal in my body. And you would think that having 3 little gallbladder clips, which I also had removed with all the metal I have in my body, wouldn't have done a thing or would have done very little, because that was my doctor said, I'll remove this little bitty button, but you've got a neck fusion, you got a back fusion, you got pins in your pelvis. It's not going to do anything. I'll tell you, it made a huge difference. I have less systemic pain. I have less food allergies. My hair, this is the one direct response that I had to my gallbladder clips, was my hair came back thick and curly, and it was brittle and it was falling out, but it did. And this will give you some comfort. It took 6 months for me to notice those changes. I don't have obviously the proof. I'm not a medical doctor, but my feeling is that it takes the body 4 to 6 months to rid itself of the inflammation in the area. If there was any metal byproducts remaining, I just think it takes time. It's still very fresh for you. Are you off the steroids at this point?
I stopped the steroids a week after I got home from Miami, and I've been off of them since. I got back to
Wonderful.
Miami on the 15th of January. So I rapidly dwindled off of them instead of just dropping my dose by 10 each week, because I needed off those things. They were killing me just as fast as the other stuff was. My blood sugar was always going up, and I gained about 65 pounds just from the time they put me on the steroids until they put me under the knife to get them out. So they had to go. They definitely had to go. But once
Well,
I stopped them,
you'll look forward to getting all of that back, getting your life back. It'll happen.
yeah, I stopped them, and so far I've been good.
So very glad. What does the future look like for you? What kind of personal, professional goals do you have? Are you going to continue to try to do advocacy within the metal community? I mean, this is a huge step. We're going to give you some media here to share, but thank you.
For me, the biggest thing, and what I've relayed to my husband, and I heard my husband relay that to my child today, and that made me so proud, because my child was like, Mommy, how come I can't come in your bedroom today between so and so and so and so? I said, because I'm doing an interview. Why, Mommy? Are you leaving your job? You love your job. No, honey, it's not that kind of interview. It's a medical interview. And I actually heard my husband chime in and say, honey, it's because what Mommy went through was very rare, and she doesn't want anybody to go through that ever again. And that's the God's honest truth. I don't. Because I came out on the other side somehow, thanks be to God upstairs. Somebody else may not be so lucky. So yeah, I'm happy to share.
You've shared some images and some stuff that we're going to put up on the podcast, link to the page, and we've got a great list of resources. Did you ever test for metal allergies? We didn't talk about that. Have you been able to test yet? And is that a plan?
I asked my doctor about that. He said he doesn't really feel like it's necessary because there's so much definitive proof right now as far as the nickel goes. He does want me, after my body's healed, after I've been off the steroids for a while, to go ahead and start going down the route of different tests to see what kind of metals or other agents in general that I'm allergic to, which is fine. Whatever they suggest, perfectly fine. Me, in the back of my brain, I'm afraid to drink out of a soda can right now. Okay.
What do you do for diet? There's a diet. Do you adhere to that?
I do not. That I do not. And here's the odd thing. Now, I will say this. The the Apple Watch incident where it started blistering and stuff, it only started blistering my skin really badly after the gallbladder surgery. So I don't know if it's just that I had so much in my body in total that my body was just like really, really angry. And it was like, nope, no more, no more, no more, get rid of it, or what? But I'm actually wearing it. Since they pulled those clips, I can tolerate the watch. So little baby bits I can. Anything more than that.
Let me put in a plug, because I didn't know that diet was really a factor. I didn't even know until after I'd had 7 surgeries to implant metal that there was such a thing with nickel in food. And I've had 4 surgeries to remove a lot of metal, if you've heard my story. But the low nickel diet has absolutely made a tremendous difference in my allergies, in my systemic pain, in my mental clarity. So every little bit, especially trying to heal, I think is a huge factor. Probably about 50% of the people I know with allergies to surgical nickel are not on a low nickel diet. And it really has been a huge factor. I feel blessed that knowing what makes my body struggle, that I can give it something to help it. I did all the things. I was drinking out of a stainless steel Berkey water filter. It's the best water filter you can have in your home. It was like $300. And I was using stainless steel cookware because they said all the stuff was non-toxic. And I have noticed a direct difference switching from a Berkey water filter and stainless steel to ceramic coated cookware to a plastic filtering pitcher that filters nickel. It has made a huge difference. Who knew that there was nickel in food? I certainly didn't, but it has been a really big thing. So definitely something that might help get you over the edge. And an interesting thing, do you have metal fillings at all?
I'm about to turn 40 years old and I've never had a cavity. So no.
Oh, lucky you. I'll tell you a funny story about the Apple Watch. This is maybe a little TMI, but I have a bunch of metal in my body. Are you aware of what galvanism is? How different metals have different charges? So I
Yes.
felt like I had electricity running through my body. I called it surging because I didn't know what else to call it. It was just like weird. And I bought an Apple Watch and I loved it, loved it. So cute. And I'm a big Apple person. You can send the check right here, Apple. But anyway, I'm a huge Apple person. And I was wearing this Apple Watch. And within 2 days, I started feeling like I'd lay down to go to bed. And I felt like I was plugged into a light socket. I'm like, what the heck? I like
Oh
literally felt
gosh.
like I'd been electrocuted. I was just like, had all this caffeine. It just had this thought. I'm like, battery, this electrical current running through my body that we've now known as galvanism. For those just tuning in, different metals can have different electrical charges and it can create a measurable electrical current in the body. I take the Apple Watch off. Sure enough, within 24 hours, all of that feeling is gone. I'm reacting to the battery in the Apple Watch, playing off the electric current running between my metal. If that doesn't sound like in pure insanity to a doctor, I don't know what does.
I believe anything these days after this ordeal.
I'm really glad that you could wear that Apple Watch. Please wear it for me. Wrapping up here, how has this changed who you are as a person?
Changed a lot of things, really. It changes the way that I look at things as a whole. Like my family, when you come that close and you really, really think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and I'm not going to see my family. And I did that for months before the surgery because every single night when I went to bed, I was so terrified I would not wake up because it was impossible. You lay down, you can't breathe. You sit up, you can't breathe. You walk, you can't breathe. Like I never knew if I was going to wake up the next day. Right. So I was so scared of losing them for so long. And now it's just like, I want to hold them closer a lot. I've learned that I'm a heck of a lot stronger than I ever knew that I was. So much stronger than I ever gave myself credit for, which is empowering, really. Just to see what I trucked through, to see that I kept on working, to see that I kept taking care of my family and just shoving through no matter what. That was really empowering to me. It makes me very, very grateful. So very grateful. It opened my eyes to the healthcare system and how it works and doesn't. That's for sure. That's probably one big negative to take away from it all. Then you have these doctors like the physician assistant who went way above and beyond, and the surgeon who is one of the most renowned surgeons in Miami. They just take a leap and they help you, and it restores your faith in humanity as a whole. I've seen a lot of positive changes mentally from the ordeal. Yes, it was hard. It was really scary. It was the worst thing I've ever been through. But perspective wise, it's just made me very, very thankful, very humbled.
Are you glad you had the experience? If you went back, would you have the experience again because of what you've learned, or would you rather have just bypassed the whole thing?
Honest to God, I would do it again. I know that sounds insane, but if I was able to tough it out and get through it with my sanity intact and get to the other side and it helps somebody else to avoid that, then yes, I would do it again. If it helps one single person not go down that path and experience what I had to experience, I would absolutely do it again.
I want to backtrack just a second because you were talking how so much of this affected your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you were diagnosed with fibromyalgia early on. Was pain one of the symptoms since your gallbladder surgery, or did your pain pretty much stay constant? We talked about breathing, but we didn't talk about pain or other symptoms that you had.
Yeah, so the pain in my abdomen was new The only way I can explain it, like it was right under a rib cage, my right lower rib cage. It always felt like something was stuck in my rib and it just hurt all of the time, nonstop. And then it would just kind of radiate all the way around it and it would just throb constantly. But that one little spot right at my ribs was like a sharp, searing knife, like a knife was just chiseling away at the rib or something. And the surgeon ended up saying that he believes that was from the clip because he removed a clip that was touching one of my ribs. And I don't know the anatomy in there. I don't know what it looks like. So I'm going to go with whatever he says. Because, I don't typically fiddle around.
In the past, I didn't really equate histamine reactions with pain. But I have noticed personally, as I have gotten the nickel mostly out of my diet. Now I do cheat. I mean, sometimes I just need a salad. Sometimes I just need a handful of cashews, but I've noticed when I eat those foods that contain nickel that I hurt all over head to toe. And I wonder how many people that have fibromyalgia, they don't really even know what it is. I wonder how many of them, and even in your case, I wonder how much of that fibromyalgia pain is more allergy related, and could it be nickel? Probably this presents in all different kinds of allergies, but if you experiment with that and your pain goes away, would you come back and let us know?
I'd be happy to. Honestly, I haven't really had a big problem with the fibromyalgia in years. For a while, it flared up a lot. I was hurting all the time. But at that time, I had a lot of stress in my life. Like I was working at a job I hated, and it was just very, very stressful. I think people think it's crazy, but I think that stress absolutely does a lot of damage to your body. It wears you down.
You brought up a good point. You went through some serious medical issues here. I don't know about you, but I imagine I have a fair amount of medical PTSD. Do you have some? And what are you going to do to protect your mental health on the other side of this experience?
I've dealt with everything psychologically pretty well, considering. There's a few little things here and there that'll still make me tear up when I talk about my loved ones and them just basically going down that road, insinuating I'm not going to be here anymore. When I'm specifically going down and trying to travel and trying to reach those memories, yeah, it doesn't feel good. But by and large, I'm a very optimistic person. So I always try and take something great, even from the worst of things. And for me, that's just being able to hope and pray to God that I can make changes so nobody else goes through it. I guess I focus so much on that aspect. And as far as like being afraid of doctors and such, I am absolutely terrified. I will not lie. So when I get sick, I'll do telemedicine that my work offers because we have a telehealth provider. I'll say, my son has this, that, or the other. Can you send me an antibiotic, please? Because we know he has this. Okay, no problem. Fine. I can handle that kind of interaction. And the thought of going to doctor's offices and having tests run and do this, do that is terrifying. I don't want to tell them if I'm having pain somewhere because in my mind, it's you're going to have surgery again. I don't want surgery on anything ever again.
You might have them come back to you and say, go home and put your affairs in order again. And you don't want to go through that again.
Yeah. So that portion of it is absolutely terrifying. Terrifying. And I'm sure it will fade over time. I'm sure. But unless I'm so close to death, there's a tag on my toe, I don't want another surgery. That's kind of where I'm at.
Do you plan on therapy to help unpack? Because we know the body remembers trauma and it holds trauma. And this was traumatic. Do you plan on any therapy at this point to help deal with some of that?
I've been on the fence about it. My family is not very big into the whole psychological medicine thing. So a lot of people aren't. I believe it's very therapeutic. However, it's one of those things.
We're going to have a really great episode. I did a lot just from home with some wonderful online resources, some people that have EFT tapping meditations and other kind of modalities that are more conservative than traditional that can be done from home. But one of my biggest things, I said that I didn't really start to heal until, and we'll have a whole episode on this at some point, but I didn't really start to heal until I reprogrammed my brain because I got so used to being in pain and my body got so just was always guarding and always defensive, that your body can get stuck in this kind of chronic fight or flight phase and actually perpetuate chronic pain symptoms and can perpetuate other symptoms of chronic illness and autoimmunity and different things. And retraining and reprogramming the brain actually reverses and unpacks a lot of that. So our body doesn't hold that as much anymore. And I know I shared with somebody else, there's a therapy called EMDR. Have you ever heard of EMDR?
I have
So
not.
EMDR is something that they use a series of rapid eye movements to reprogram the body. It has all kinds of clinical studies around it. I was phobic of flying for decades, my entire life, and I fly all the time, but I was really, really phobic on an airplane, and I went and had this EMDR for that, and PTSD from the Lyme disease and the metal allergies and all the things that I went through. But I can now get on a plane and 85% of those symptoms are gone. It feels totally different inside my body, to the point that I went to Belize with my husband last year and decided to almost get my pilot's license, which is huge. There really are some fantastic modalities that really help. So I look forward to exploring that as just part of the recovery for all of us in the metal allergic community on the podcast, and bringing some of these resources that help me to others. But, I'm just so sorry. I just want to reach out and give a collective hug to anybody that's gone through it, because we know how traumatic it really can be. Any parting thoughts? I guess we're out of time, so we need to wrap up. I just can't thank you enough for being willing to come on and share with us.
I think my parting thoughts are, communication. If you're watching this podcast, just because you get here by happenstance and you have a surgery coming up, ask questions, communicate. Think about the little things, because I never thought about the little things. And if I had thought about the little things and I had made the connection to my problem with jewelry and the surgery and the fact that they use clips in almost every surgery that they do inside of you without your knowledge, I would have saved myself a lot of trouble, a whole lot. So communication, ask questions. And if you're going through it now, there's definitely hope.
Cheryl, I really appreciate it. And y'all come back and hang out with us again. Thank you, Cheryl, and to all of you for being here and helping us with this movement to tell the medical establishment that we're not going to take it anymore. Cheryl, you're the first. Who is your favorite heavy metal band? This is now a prerequisite for anybody coming on the Heavily Metal podcast. Who is your favorite heavy metal band?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. You have to love Metallica. You have to. Yes, it has a name metal inside of it, but you have to love them. You can't not. There's too many to choose from, but Metallica is a really good choice.
Okay, what's your favorite heavy metal song? Do we have one?
My favorite Metallica song, and it's going to sound hilarious, is Whiskey in a Jar. I love that song. That's the best song ever by them. Why? I don't know. When my husband and I met, I was actually listening to Rob Zombie, and he called it the devil's music. Like, he was terrified because I'm sitting there listening to Dragula.
The funny story with me is that I grew up in Utah, and I dated for a short time the drummer from Kiss, Eric Carr. He's now passed away. This was back when there was the whole Tipper Gore thing, and they were censoring the music, and everybody in Utah thought that Kiss stood for Knights in Service of Satan or something like that. So the funny story is that my mom called Eric the Warlock for his entire life. And he would call her like, "Hey mom, it's the Warlock."
Oh my goodness.
Funny stories. And now my mom loves that music. My dad burnt the Styx Paradise Theater album. How cool of an album is that? I saved so hard for this cassette tape, and he burned it. My dad's passed away. He's probably rolling over in his grave, but it's one of my mom's favorite bands. So
my first cassette tape was Meatloaf, Bad Out of Hell. That was the first album I had. And I can still remember every single song on that track. And my favorite was I Want My Money Back. And it's hilarious because I was a kid and it meant absolutely nothing to me then. But now I think about it. I Want My Money
Back is Bad Out of Hell too, isn't it? It is.
Is it?
I Want My Money Back is Bad Out of Hell too.
Well,
it was, because the original was Paradise by the Dashboard Light, 2 out of 3
Dashboard Lights, yep. Mm-hmm.
Were you ever into Jim Steinman? Did you know Jim Steinman, who wrote a lot of Meat's music?
No, I was real young when I got big into Meatloaf. Like, I was young.
Jim Steinman was the one that did Love, Death, and an American Guitar. It was a story song, as talking about his dad, and you got a heck of a lot to learn about rock and roll. And anyway, he wrote Total Eclipse of the Heart for Bonnie Tyler. He wrote a lot of just really cool stuff. Thank you for tuning in today. Please don't forget to follow me on social media and to like, share, and subscribe. My primary mission is reaching out to others who may be suffering from hypersensitivity reactions to metal implants and pointing them to resources that can assist with hope, help, and healing. If you know someone that suffers from a chronic illness, you might ask if they have any implanted metal hardware and if they've ever had a reaction to jewelry or metals of any kind. Might not even be on their radar. Visit us at heavilymetaled.com where you can find images and documentation relating to our show today, as well as a number of valuable resources and links to assist you on your own personal healing journey. Until next time, keep on rocking.